Yay, it's working. Hi, everyone. I am here to interview and chat with Aaron Jack. He is an artist. Um, I see him. Let me see if I can add him. Let me take All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited that you guys are joining and tuning in. Hi, Aaron.
Hey,
How's it going?
there I am. I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited to chat with you and learn more about your work and just everything that you do creatively.
I am so thankful for you having me on here. I do so many interviews myself. I'm just like, wow, this is really cool. And then I'm gonna get to interview you in a few weeks.
Yes, I know I'm so excited and I totally know what you mean. It's nice sometimes to be the one that's being interviewed and like chat about your journey.
Yeah, it's nice to have that like collaboration and all of that with other artists to share what we each have, what we each have to share. So I
That's
appreciate that.
sides. Like I love learning about people's journeys and interviewing, and it's also cool to share mine. So it's so fun. But I think before we even get started, I want to just know about like your background, where you're from, how you got into art, and just how your journey began.
So let's see how my journey began. Well, I've been kind of doing art my whole life. I don't really remember a time when I wasn't doing art. Art, music, and then I got into photography along the way, and just kind of like that took off, and I started freelancing and doing my own projects and interning. So that was like in high school, and photographing performances and just like getting to experience all different art forms. I went to creative and performing arts high school,
Wow.
and so it's just hours of art every day,
Oh,
plus homework.
I would have loved that as a teenager. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it was like complete art all the time, basically 3 hours of classes plus homework of art. And then I interned outside of high school and then just kept interning and started to photograph a lot of dance and then started doing that in college, photographing dance like all the time because I went to a college that like specialized in dance
Mm-hmm.
at Point Park. And then I got into photographing jazz, and I always like painted and drew and different things on the side and mixed my photography with other art forms, like mixing it with dance and live performance and kind of like intermixing. And I always did like, painting, printmaking, digital media, all these different things as like, that supported my photography was like my main thing. And my photography was my way to interact with other art forms. So I went to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and I got into design and product design and system design, uh, and went off on that. And all the time I was like working with metal and illustrating for my photographs and taking that into design. And so it's like back and forth. I was like have a sometimes it's like a connection between myself and my different art forms. Then
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like bringing that in other collaborating with others who have different art forms. So it's like, oh, I'm photographing a dancer or musician, and then I'm bringing that into steel, and then I'm finding different ways to like meld and bridge those gaps and form those connections between different forms of culture and cultural understanding. Oh, my lights.
That's it.
Put on the light.
I have such an appreciation for that too because I've always been just very like painting, drawing. Like that's been it for me. But and I have experimented, but I think that's so cool. And I can imagine just like opens your mind so much. I think it's so cool to study the same subject in so many different like visual mediums. That's like really interesting. I haven't actually thought about that in so long. That idea of like studying one thing and then portraying it in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's just like constantly trying to experiment and like moving it and shaping it and when I went to India a few years ago, that really shaped my journey in a whole other way, where I was there for many months, and so I was traveling and working on me and my meditations, however, and meeting spiritual people, and that that time, those months in India really transformed me. And I've always been traveling and photographing, so it's like so it's traveling and writing, photographing, like creating this thing. And then
Cool.
I came to focus on like poetry, drawing, like really came back to my drawing. And that's how I created the series that I started working on with like line drawings, where I really created this account, um, was around how to conceptualize elements of traveling, how to conceptualize life as moving through and connecting in different ways. It's not always like a straight line from here to there, or a meditation. It's like all of these aspects of life, and then little moments of intrigue or connection or beauty that interlace a larger understanding of what life is and how it's connected together. So that put me on this journey of taking my taking my conceptual side and bringing it back into um, drawing. And I tried, and this idea of like simplicity and zen and like all these aspects of like how can I simplify it to the simplest utility of pen and paper, the simplest pen, the simplest paper in my journal. How to take like all of this and that, and then take it down to a simplicity where I could understand that conceptual dynamic between myself and the work, my experience in life, and how I was able to interpret that internally.
Hmm.
So when you look back on my feed, you'll be able to see like these line drawings. And so that's as like practicing this understanding of how do I interpret the life around me? How can life and the feeling be expressed in very simple forms? And so it lends me to this latest series I've been working on, which is the Sumi ink and the paper and the rice paper, because I discovered this artist, writer, Zen master, Paul Reps, and he related writing with like conceptual work with the image. And I was like, oh, so that brings us into today, some of the work with imagery, writing, the simplicity of the simple rice paper and ink, as kind of the basis for what I might later become part of the layers.
Wow.
So
That's incredible. And I think I've seen your line drawings, and I know I told you before, they're very meditative, and I just love they feel very organic. And I just think it's incredible. You are taking all of these concepts and experiences and, what might be considered as quite dense material, and you're just simplifying it down to ink and paper, which is like how we first learn to express ourselves. I think that's amazing.
thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate your like, these just a moment to be able to talk about it. I really appreciate that. And that's why I've been doing, part of what I've been doing is like 62 interviews as of today, 62 like full length interviews since
That's
quarantine.
Oh my gosh, that's so many.
So I really appreciate you inviting me on, to be now on the other side and be like, oh, like,
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important to talk about our work. And I actually find that from talking about my own work, I discover so much. I discover like what my intention really is. And it helps me to understand my process the more that I speak about it. Because as artists, we're often like, such a solitary thing. We're alone in the studio with our work. And I find that I will post photos of it, or I'll share, the visual images with people, but I'm not often engaging in dialogue or really reflecting on it or speaking about it myself. And I think that through doing that, you can just understand what you're trying to do so much better.
So true. So true. And so I really appreciate that you're providing that for myself and others. I think that's like
Well, you too.
space to really talk about the work. And and it's not just like, oh, it's going to be like get it out there or whatever. It's just like, oh, like be able to process and have
Yeah.
feedback, because that's culture. It's a cycle of us like, oh, this is what it is, here's my symbolism, what do you think, how do you feel, how are you going to interpret it into something else, and create that dialogue of
And that's such,
us like
and I really find that, it's one thing to just scroll through someone's Instagram, look on their website and see the work. But when you really hear someone speaking about it, talking about it, sharing, where it came from, their intention, and you just learn so much more. And the work itself then takes on a whole new meaning. And it's like this transformation. One thing I miss about art school so much is just being in a community or a class of people and really engaging in these in-depth conversations and reflecting on the work. It's an incredible thing, and I think it's so vital to our work as artists.
it is. And that's why I'm just like, oh, more people just like talking about their work, getting it out there, how to give that depth to, okay, here it is, but then how can we relate to it? And so that's what I'm here to do, help you relate to what it is that I'm doing, what it is, why I'm doing, why I'm doing the interviews, why I'm creating like, oh, so that brings me to another point that I've been thinking about
Yeah.
lately is like the interviews for me, it's almost like a portrait of someone for me. Like, so now that I'm like 62 in, since quarantine, uh,
Amazing. That's a huge like win. That's crazy.
those those are like full hour to 2 hour length interviews. Because I've done other short things. I've discovered also like community days or like artist show and tell days, which feel free to take that. But just like allowing anybody to call in. I took that from some singers who just had people calling in, um, and then I work with the Jam Nation, which is another really cool Instagram account. Basically, they just have people call in and jam together. So it's a lot of musicians, but I come on and paint, and it's just like totally open. A
Oh,
lot of them are based in LA, but then there's like some all around the world. And like I'm on the East Coast. So it's just like being able to engage from art form to art form. So that really brought me back to a sense of so over this quarantine, I'll bring us back for a moment because I've been wanting to share this, and now's the perfect time to share. So over the quarantine, because now I have like a little bit more perspective on the beginning of it, um, is I came back to like, okay, what am I doing and how am I doing it? I was out traveling through the West Coast, through San Francisco, LA, and then I was in Vegas on tour with a jazz musician who I've been photographing and documenting his life for the last 5.5, 6 years. Um, in May, the beginning of May, he passed away. So he's like 72, and we got him to, I helped get him back to number 3 in the jazz charts in the US, and documenting his life and like understanding and listening to his stories and interviewing him and all the other members of the band. And so that really made me think about like, what is my role on one side of the camera, what is my role as an observer, and how can I take that observation and put myself on the other end, like I'm observed, am I observing, am I creating, where's my role? And just as the observer, it's kind of like the element of editing or like
mm,
putting in those pieces and directing,
yeah.
and also giving space
Yeah.
and like the negative space and allowing just like what happens.
Yeah.
So I think about this as like the portrait of the person. Like, how am I creating a portrait of the person? How am I allowing myself to be on the other end of that
Yeah.
portrait, and also as I'm creating a portrait of others. So I
Yeah.
started by 2 years ago. I got back from this thing and I just photographed all of these amazing people, went on this journey, and just amazing people. And so I came back. I'm like, oh, I can't see anybody for weeks. So I started painting these portraits of the people that I met and their amazing stories through the West Coast. So I painted like 34 portraits. Uh, and then I was like doing it all in Sumi ink. And I was like, oh, because I'd photographed all of the, just tons of people. And like I was really focused on like this moment of the smile and how to find the inner voice and the inner dreams of the people that I was meeting on the road. So I was like, okay, like this is part of it. So I'm like, how can I reconnect? And so I started painting them and and then because I was posting these paintings, started reconnecting with these people. And I'm like, wow, I can bring my photograph further through this painting. And then I'm like, okay, what do I really like about this? I put together a gallery show, and then I was like, started to interview these artists. I'm like, oh, the part that I really liked was the connecting to the people. So I started like, okay, and how can I create with the people? So I started to find this, like, I'm painting my style with musicians. So that's like how the painting and music connect for me. I'm like, it's like a, like what's the communication, and talking about this idea that I have, like, from my background, like traveling to China, traveling to India, like doing work in different places, like design research, like cross-cultural communication. How am I able to communicate from people who can't really understand our language, which is so important right now? People can't understand, they're using different like subtleties, different language. How are just making us think about, like, how are we interpreting what the other person says and slowing down ourselves enough to really find what it is that they're trying to say.
Yeah.
So that's like this element of that communication, that the painting becomes an aspect, the artifact of the communication between myself and this musician, where maybe one of us is listening, but in a lot there's both that one person's watching while I'm like listening, and then that like flow
Mm-hmm.
back and forth to create like the cultural communication,
Yeah.
to show that we can go beyond just what we know, but our interpretation to be seen and be seen is so important.
I
So
love thing because you're thinking about communication in a different way and how you can, not just create a connection and a relationship with someone, but how you can actually communicate with someone through, visual medium or visual media, I mean, and things like that, which is really interesting. And I think right now in this time of quarantine, that is something that's really important for us to be thinking about, how can we communicate with beyond what we know.
exactly. And how do we communicate through the screen? I think that's the other aspect, is like we're communicating through the screen. How can we be like, I heard you, I understand you, I feel what you feel?
A deeper communication and sort of like a transfer of energy it's making me think of as well.
Well, that's exactly it. So the beautiful thing about Sumi ink,
Hmm.
and it's made of this charcoal, which I've also been like amazed by, like the medium of it.
Oh, beautiful.
Um, it's like this ancient Japanese, like they use it in ancient Japan and China, and like calligraphy, and it has this aspect of chi, like the energy that flows through us is
Yes.
able to be so beautifully put through into this medium. So I'm like, wow, like the
Right.
energy flow, how can we see that the energy really exists? How do we know that we really had this conversation? How do we, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
internalize and know that it existed?
Yeah.
When the tree fell in the forest, how do we know?
Yeah, exactly. And I love how you refer to it as like an artifact too. It's like what's left over, sort of, but it's like it embodies all of the energy and, everything that occurred in that conversation or that whatever the communication was. But I have to say, Sumi, I've done I teach art and I've done Sumi Nagashi with my students, even my really young students, and they just love it. Like it is so beautiful. I think I discovered it about 7 years ago, and I was just so taken by like what you're doing. I didn't know that it was actually charcoal based in the ink, which is so interesting. But I don't know if you've ever tried where you use like you did. I think the way we did it was we took like these giant sort of like I don't know what they're called, but they're sort of like giant containers. You fill them with water, and then you drop the Sumi Nagashi ink in, and it creates these sort of like concentric circles, and you lay the paper onto it. It is like the stunning process, and the artist who introduced me to it, she does it professionally. I'll have to show you her work and vice
Yeah.
versa because it is really just stunning. Stunning.
Wow, that's cool. That's so cool. I love that. I love the medium also. Like I discovered, so I started reaching out to like what how communication could bridge that barrier. Like how do we bridge this barrier, especially in this age of COVID? Like how do we bridge this communication barrier of the digital form, and like what are sensations that can be, that sensualness that can bridge beyond the digital form. So I started to like, I'm like working with all these musicians, and I started working with a dancer in Italy, and we created this amazing piece together, which I've yet to show, but I will show it soon. Um, Again, it was done on live, but then it was like I took it up. I just it didn't save on there, but I saved it on my computer. So, but it's amazing. I like projected her onto my page, and we're like dancing together with the ink,
That's so cool.
uh,
I love
and
that
then I got. Hmm?
collaboration, dance and music, and that's just so incredible. I love that.
And then I got my friend to then create a soundtrack for it. So like after we already did this thing, then I took part of it, and my friend made the 20-minute soundtrack for us doing our thing. And it was so interesting because she had seen me work with Lucas Bacher, who's a musician in LA. And so she's in Italy, I'm on the East Coast, and she's like, wouldn't it be so cool if we could work together? And like before she asked me, I'd already sent it over, and Lucas had already made the soundtrack, and I was like, and here you go.
That's amazing.
So it was just like cool to find that. And then in the meantime, I was like looking for other people. So I was like, I want to work with a chef. And then it turns out I had a friend who was a chef who used to be a photographer who I knew like 15 years ago. And he had moved away. He's like in Cleveland. And anyhow, I was like, hey, we should do something together. And he's like, I'm like, we should like, do a thing. And he's like, I'm going to do better. He's like, I'm going to make you ink. And I was like, wow.
That's
So he
so
started,
cool.
yeah. So he started like sending me like inks and jars, and I was open.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I love that. That's amazing.
So he made me inks and jars, and then he's like, you know what? We're gonna do it even better. He's like, we're gonna make it a thing. So we made a show together. Like it turned out to be like a solo show that I had my first solo show in Youngstown, Ohio, like 2 months ago. Like my first ever like painting multimedia solo show. And he was making me the inks that I was like using in some of the work. And then we were having all these lives, and then he made a sauce. He made this like dish with with this Japanese sauce using most of the ingredients that he made for the ink that looked like the ink. That
Oh,
people picked up the things, they picked up the food there, and then they finished it at home via Zoom. So we like came up with this conceptual framework for people to like see the show, and like individually, because this was like a few months ago still. So like people could, you know, and then they could like taste the ink at home and have this like connection. We had live musicians outside, and I was like painting outside. I have some Instagram lives. I was like painting outside, and people are picking up this dish and having this conversation with the chef, with the Ronin chef. It was amazing, and they're like tasting what they just saw on the walls. They're like, a part of that is like
That's so they're like
part
experiencing
of that.
so in so many different ways. That's so cool.
So it becomes like the culture of creation, that it's like, how do we, communication of the material, of the message, the medium is the message,
I love
and that in that Marshall McCullough sort of way is, so the medium of like food to the ink and the simplicity of like utility. It's like
yeah.
there's like that energy flow, the energy in and through the body. It becomes us. That charcoal is what connects us. So I called it the carbon connection because I was working with musicians who actually made me theme music for my show. and and I was like talking about the concept, and my one friend Casey Yale, the official Yale on Instagram, go check him out. He's amazing. Um, he made the song called The Carbon Connection. I'm like, that's it. Like, we're all made of carbon. Like, we're eating food. The ink is made of carbon. Like,
That's
we're, you
cool.
know,
Part of your body, it's like flowing through you. And I think that's so interesting. And it's so different because, you're so used to going to a gallery show or an exhibit and, you view the work, you might engage in a conversation about it, and then you leave. So I think it's very innovative to be thinking about how you can really create an experience for people that is multisensory and goes beyond what is traditionally done. So that's incredible. Oh my gosh.
thank you. Thank you. I really think it's especially important in this time, the multi-sensory aspect, as we're not able to necessarily have this the social sensory in the same ways. How can we delve more into the internal? And I think that's a lot of what my work is, in fact, about, that internal. There's like this internal communication with the energy, and also like, how do I share that communication, and how do I connect with others through that, through the work on myself. So I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, like, how can I do that? And so through the food, through the material itself, it became like this visual audio experience for like each individual and social connection that allowed people to find, I hope,
Yeah.
um, find something greater to connect with. So if anyone out there knows the gallery, you would love this.
They
I'd
don't.
love to bring it to you.
No, I love that. Well, speaking of your work, since we're talking so much about it, why don't I pull up some images?
Yes, please.
I have not done this before, so bear with me. I think I can figure it out though.
Yeah, it's in this lower right hand corner for you. Should be. There you go.
Hey,
There
okay.
we
Oh,
go.
girl, it's like a slide. This is like when I'm teaching. It's a slideshow. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just go, one by one and just tell me a little bit about, each piece.
Yeah. Awesome. And feel free to ask any questions. Anyone in the comments who has a question, feel free to ask ask some questions. I know I've seen some awesome people down here. Feel free to ask the questions, and I'll see what I can do. So this first one, I was working with a friend of mine, Sumi. I actually met her in India at a wedding that I was dancing on the Udaipur City Palace stage. I was like dancing on the stage. I learned all these like dances in Jaipur. And it's like one thing, I met people up in the Himalayas and they're amazing people. Uh and then so now it's like I come back and I see her like posting about her work with GQ and doing these like sound meditations for people. And so this is one of the pieces that came out of the sound meditation that she was doing for me, and based on what she was seeing. So it was like this communication back and forth. And so it's like I met her, like we met each other. And then in this moment, it's like it becomes something more. So that's something beautiful to me, are the people that I meet along the way, along my journey, and how we can interconnect and share and create together.
You
So
love the movement, the contrast. And even just like the accidental marks, I think that contributes a lot to the piece. So beautiful and very cool story. And so, and this one also, there's a lot of really beautiful movement in this piece.
Thank you. So the next few, I don't know that I'll necessarily give you that same big story for each one, but I just wanted to share, like what that these are kind of those artifacts of that communication, those
Mm,
stories, those faces that I see, the people, the moments, the backs, the feelings. It becomes those things. Like, how do we make meaning of the world?
yeah. Which I think is like the essential question for every artist, really.
Exactly. It's like there's this big open world, and as we communicate to each other, as we listen, as we understand, as we speak, and have this deeply listen, become more deeply active in the world in that way, more deeply listen and active listening.
Mhm.
How does it become something? How does it become meaningful? How do we give meaning to something that just came to be?
No, and I can relate to so much of what you're saying as well because um, I'm also an abstract artist. I work with beeswax, but a lot of movement and a lot of just interpreting the world through texture and a lot of sort of accidental mark making and organic, processes that are not premeditated or thought out. And so I can really relate to your process. And um, I think the beautiful thing that I've always thought about abstract work is that there's obviously not a set meaning. It can be interpreted in so many ways and viewed in so many different ways. And I just think that's such a magical thing. And also a way I view abstract work as sort of like a conversation with the viewer as well, because they're interpreting their own meaning from your work. But I oftentimes think that abstract work can sort of trigger different memories and experiences within the viewer. So it becomes this very sort of interactive process.
And that's actually, in fact, an interesting thing onto itself. Is like there's like a meta version of what's happening. It's like not only are we having this conversation, but then there's people who are then interpreting it at home, like interpreting it outside of my mind or outside of your mind, outside of like what is a screen.
Yeah,
Everyone's interpreting and making meaning of
yeah,
our conversation onto themselves. Are they watching it live? Where are they? What's the feeling that you as the viewer you had this morning? Do you remember? Maybe tomorrow morning you wake up and you have a new feeling, a new moment, new something that wakes you up inside. You go write it down. That, I mean, it takes sense. It takes the moment to be present with that. But I find that presence with that moment helps to find that meaning inside
yes,
and
yeah,
can help interpret what is and how one interprets just what we're doing right now.
yes. And I think that's like such a powerful thing about abstract work. And I have such an appreciation for realism and things like that. But if you see a realistic portrait, that's what it is. There's not a ton of it's just kind of that's it. And I think being able to look at a piece and see something that someone else might not see or interpret in a way that's really personal, actually, is a really beautiful and powerful thing. So,
So
well,
I'd like to give this to the viewer, to interpret it as you will. Feel free to make a comment now or later, but feel free to interpret as you like and share. What you see. I I I find that so fascinating. What
yeah,
um, what the viewer likes to see as you know, to understand that as a reflection, what we see in the world as a reflection onto ourselves, and to have that conversation as like that internal external conversation.
yes, exactly. Definitely internal, external. dialogue. I've been wanting to ask you about your space because I keep seeing, is this from your gallery show?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Because I've seen different images of it, and I was like, is that your studio? Is that because it's a really cool space, and I love all the light that filters it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that would be. It was my studio space sort of for a month. So
Okay.
while I had the show up, I was so blessed, like, to have the show and work with the soap gallery in Youngstown, which was really an interesting like connection between like carbon and soap. Like it's like the soap gallery and
Two very different elements, but interesting that they're like coming together in that way. That's so funny.
exactly. And that's like the beautiful thing. It's like onto itself life as an abstract element. And when we take a step back and can see these things and apply meaning, look, see, there's my friend Money right now, who I lived with in India. I was just talking about you. I was in India. That time we were in Udaipur. That was a good time. Um, I lived at Money's house in Jaipur for a while. So thank you. Um,
And
so anyhow, but like another beautiful space. It's like, as you know, how do we interpret these beautiful spaces and interesting spaces around us? And then that, you know, how do we allow that to become part of us or not allowed? You know, it's like
yeah,
choice.
it looks like my friend Danny joined
Hmm.
comment.
Cool.
Remind me of his.
And Gaz look says your art concepts remind me of the surrealist sub movement, um, automatism.
Automatism?
Automatism.
I think I remember learning about that in college.
Oh yeah. Okay.
um, it's sort of an emphasis on like the autonomous process of making art, I think. Something.
Yeah. There like I think Kandinsky, and then there was like a group, and I just was learning about one female artist who really embraced it and only has since become very like popular, but is only like they were only allowed to show her work like 50 years after her death. So it's,
Oh, it's so
I
interesting.
mean, like, because she didn't want it to be
Oh,
seen. So it's
okay.
like
I say, what was the reason for that? That's so interesting.
um what I do know is that Laurence de Velmy, she paints these portraits of or these like, it reinterprets people's works from art history
Mm-hmm.
and then paints them as like an Instagram post, and then like how people would interact and what they would label them as.
Mm-hmm.
So check her out, and then she will tell you more about that because she's an art historian. So that's one thing that I learned about talking to others, that I'm able to learn so much by having the conversation. So feel free to DM me, and I appreciate your words.
Yeah.
Oh yes. So here, in the windows, I started to think about this idea of like, I so just being there in a new place, I met some amazing people, amazing musicians, and then I started to think about and work with them to curate like how these were going to be. And it's like looking at them as like, how are they in sets? How are they this way? And then I started to think about them as like, in some other windows I might have had better examples, but like looking at them kind of as musical notes on this like scale. And so like each painting almost becomes a musical note. Like, how does the communication between myself and another become an element of something else? So like building these, so how does the communication become this artifact, and then that artifact becomes like a note that can then be used in another composition?
Oh, I think that's so interesting to think about. And, I don't have a ton of, musical knowledge, but I think it's really cool that you have experience with music and art and you're constantly finding ways to kind of bridge the gap between the two. Beautiful. Is
Yeah,
it,
and hmm?
go ahead. I was going to ask if this is also the gallery, right?
Yeah. So this is like the other view. On the left hand side, you can see where I had a big setup, and I did some like painting live in the gallery. Then when I had like two hey Jessica Kaplan, just go follow Jessica. Also, she's an amazing artist. So I love it. We did an amazing interview. You should be on here too, Jessica. DM. So yeah, so it's just like this is the studio space. I had, musicians there one day, so it's like two musicians, the face covering, um and then two viewers, and then all the viewers on Instagram. Like, how do we bridge the gap on, and then I'm there painting. So it's like a
Wow.
giant 1,600 square foot space. How do we bridge the gaps of art, and then bridge it into like the local community, and through like, maybe bringing more sensualness to it through like food and live music, but then how to bring what I can to that online audience and share, and still be able to share the depths of what's happening.
Yeah, because I can imagine that's sort of the challenge is like when you have an experience that is so sensory like that, to be in person, it's like, how does that translate to then social media and being able to, obviously people won't be able to experience it in the same way, but at least getting them to experience like a little bit of that, what you were able to bring to that space. So, oh my gosh, well, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like and this is one of the pieces I made like live there. So I like made it live and then I hung it up. So it becomes this like communication, like what are these like the notes become like, or the notes, the inner feelings, the inner, that artifact of the communication becomes an element there, that like that energy flow becomes a moment, the written abstraction, that written moment. Like, how are we able to take from that an element, and then maybe like people are able to take an element home with them. So
Yeah.
it's like, or like they don't even have to be there to buy it. So it's like, how to like transfer that understanding, those moments, and now we're able to discuss that abstract moment
Yeah. Well, and
with all of you.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, just looking at this piece, it really looks like it embodies and just captures the energy and the movement of that experience. Like I can almost feel it just from looking at the way that the marks are flowing and sort of interlocking and things like that. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, and it also, there became like a moment during this series, because it's like I'm dancing with my paintbrush almost.
Definitely see that.
And this one, I was able to be outside, and I was like literally dancing with my paintbrush, and I was like,
It,
and I was,
feel that energy. It's beautiful.
thank you,
And then there's a
thank you.
video here. So is this, tell us a little bit about this piece.
Oh yeah, so this one, there is a soundtrack as well. I don't know that you'll be able to hear it, and it might not be in this one, but you can go on my page and hopefully hear a version with a soundtrack that got made after the fact. So this one, I've been playing around with this idea of bringing words in, and then my study of Sumi ink, my study of like poetic, picture poems, which led me into this series.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I've been studying more Zen koans lately, and so the idea here is that there's this is like a physical manifestation of a Zen koan, where there's a there's this academic guy. He walks into like a Zen monk space and is like, teach me all about Zen. And so the monk, he takes this tea, and he just starts filling up the cup with tea. until it's overflowing, and he just keeps pouring. And he's like, why are you, and the academic is like, why are you doing this? And the monk is just like, you must come in here with an empty cup. Like you until you pour out what's already been in there, you can't, you can't possibly understand that. So I started to think about this and the interpretation of this, and I was like, oh, even the words fill the cup up, even the words themselves, even the story itself almost fills the cup.
Wow.
So to find out what this is, it's even to take this away.
Mm-hmm.
But one must go through these aspects to be able to find that. So I think at the end, it's like, okay, what is it without the thing onto itself? And that's the element of it, is like, there's what happens, how do we how do I make the physical version
Mm-hmm.
of this story? How do I live this story in a physical way in order to better understand what the story is trying to tell me, and then what the parts are that are missing, to maybe share that, to
Mm-hmm.
share the interpretation, or for others to interpret as they want.
And that kind of goes back to that like the collaboration between the artist and the viewer as well. I think that's, and I love that you refer to them as picture poems. I think that is so cool. And I love hearing you speak about this, because it's kind of what we were talking about before, where I wouldn't know all of this just watching the video. There's so much more meaning, and um, I think the story that it's based on is really beautiful as well. So
I appreciate you letting me speak about it, because
yes.
I, I'm finding a way to, I'm like working through this day to day, but I'm like, oh, like, how is it being shared? And if there isn't like another person to listen, which
Yeah.
is why it's so important, like the whole listening, on all sides of this, if there isn't someone asking the questions and asking it, and being refined with the questions,
Hmm.
then it doesn't come out in the same way. So I feel like it's up to us, and that's why I'm like, oh, I need to do, that's why I've done 62 interviews as of today, full interviews, is to like, how do I better listen to really understand the depth of what's going on, and how do I ask better questions? How do I better listen? How do I better actively listen? And how do I get better at being present with the unknown, with the um this is the situation, this is what's happening, how do I um
Yeah.
how do I get there? So this is like that practice of Zen for me, is that goes through the interviews, goes through the projects. It becomes it's not like, oh, I'm like the Zen whatever. I just like really enjoy it as an aspect of understanding, and as of action, and how to better understand the action than doing the action itself, and
Yeah.
to create projects, or create things that embody the action in the way that I embody elements.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I just, what you're saying about creating a space for these stories to be told, I think is a big takeaway from this interview as well, and just really how important that is. I'm almost realizing that, I feel like creating the art is sort of half of it. Engaging in a dialogue and a conversation and speaking about it is sort of the other half. And I think a lot of times it's really easy to, in this age that we're in, where everything is so instantaneous and visual, the story can get lost or not told. And so these interviews and connecting with artists and giving space for people to share their stories and talk about the work in a really meaningful and authentic way is just so, so important. Definitely feeling inspired right now.
Well, I think that's the whole thing, is how to be better at, it's a constant thing through life. How do we better listen to each other? How do we better ask the questions? How do we better become better at engaging with others' work and our own work in meaningful ways? And really, not just being like, oh, let me let everything in, but to be purposeful and, you know, and take things step by step and be like, okay, this is worth the moment of my time. Let me really investigate. Let me deeply listen. Let me try to understand what's going on. Let me try to engage in some way. How can I engage in my own life
Yeah.
with this practice? And so I'm letting, I'm giving this to the viewer as an element of like, how do you engage with what I create in your own life? How can you interpret, this is how I'm interpreting what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling, what I'm going about, how my process. And then I'm like, okay, here's my process. This is what I'm doing. How would you, it's up to you. It's up to the viewer to look and see and experience and take it in and to think and take the time to think, take the time to feel, deeply listen. So that's what I hope the viewer might get from this.
Like one thing that popped into my head as you're speaking is it's holding space for it's allowing space for understanding, really, giving an opportunity to share your story and speak about the work and its intention and where it comes from. It's giving others an opportunity to really understand, because I think now it's so common to see something and, like it or scroll past it. You're not really, and I'm guilty of it too. Oftentimes now we're not taking the time to really understand where things are coming from or the intention, the story, the meaning behind them. So
right. And I think it's not it's not anyone's fault, I think, for not sitting and listening. We're not infinite beings of infinite time.
yes.
So to not, I can't be mad about someone just scrolling past my thing. And I like it when someone, they scroll through and they're like, I'm
Yeah,
like, sweet, thank
it's
you.
not a bad thing. But I do think things are in the last few years more sped up, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like about slowing down and returning to that place of really looking and observing and understanding. And I think that's something that's can easily get lost a little bit unless we intentionally set aside space for it, like through an interview or, we have to create those spaces and those opportunities.
And I hope that I can inspire others to create those spaces, because it there needs to be just as much, there needs to be two ears for every mouth. And you know and learn, and I think learning to actively listen to others and listen to others, whether they're art, visual artists, musicians, dancers, or just like the guy on the street corner, like doing his thing, like, or like the construction workers, whoever that is. Like, how do we, we can't just like sit and listen to all of their lives and everything, but like once in a while, maybe just like setting aside and really having a deep conversation and understanding something more, and finding that empathy in ourselves to deeply listen to someone who we didn't know before. We might find, which I found many times in my interviews, I'm like, wow, like they have some really good points. Maybe not all of them, but maybe there's one or two points that I'm like, oh, I need to like look at myself. I need to look at what I'm doing. I need to reinterpret,
Yeah,
see the world.
means so much. And this is actually inspiring me to do more interviews on this platform, because we started out doing quite a lot, and then it comes down to time. A lot of the time things are just crazy and moving so fast. But I think this is really inspiring me and motivating me to keep doing these interviews, because I always find that with every interview I do, I learn usually more than one thing. I learn so much from the artist that is talking about their work, and I always walk away feeling inspired. And I want to show the next video, but I know there's
Yeah.
sound, so I'll just play it and then you can chat a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is there a sound button at the top?
Can you hear it?
No. Can anybody else hear it?
It's beautiful, but I
Can you
don't.
hear it? anyhow, yeah.
Is this the band that you collaborated with?
So this is another musician who I work with in upstate New York. He's in Binghamton. Rye. He goes by Rye. You can check it out on my page. He is like some other handle that I can't remember at the moment, but you can check it out on my page.
Yeah.
I've collaborated with him on several pieces. Um, and this was just like a moment where I realized, because I just like gave him this visual piece, and then he started, and then he gave sent it back to me because I'm like, make whatever, that's like also something is like, how do I have complete faith in other people to just be like, yes.
Yeah.
um and so I created these picture poems, which are the last pieces in the series, but I've been creating these picture poems for a year now, and then they're the ones that are just paintings. I also collaborated with Raya on this one.
Really cool with the hand.
Yeah, so it's like Gabby's hand, so I was like collaborating with her, and then like, how do I moderate this process between myself, the musician, the dancer, the different people, and taking the inspiration into the ink, and then creating this multimedia experience uh, from that, um, and then to do it in very small forms to like just like iterate. That's something that I got from my design background, is just iterate, and to like find more. So this is my one friend. He goes by Alexander Lilikoy, and so I took his geometric drawings and was like turning with those, and then mixing it with my portrait, and this on this night of like the full moon, and then it was connected to this flower that I saw. So I was like, oh, like, finding these geometries and this perfection, this hand drawn moment that is somehow imperfectly perfect,
Hmm.
and connecting that, like overlaying that with the human experience, and nature. Like, how does that perfection overlay with the imperfect human in our lived experience?
Beautiful.
So the one I created with Rye, that was interesting because he took that and he made a song with those words. So he like created a song based on the words that I wrote, based on what I saw and I experienced. So it was like,
Uh,
became like a full circle experience of like that interconnected world where it became an audio visual talking poetic interaction, which check it out on my page. So
yeah, I think
um
it's cool to incorporate so many different things, and it's definitely expanding my mind into what's possible. Like I said, I'm so painting, drawing, and I think it's so interesting to constantly be thinking about how you can take poetry, music, dance, um, art, all of these different things, and just create, something that is so unique and beautiful. This one is really cool too. I took a look at this one actually. Love this one.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, it's like, how does that imperfection or the mistakes become that perfect moment overlay together? So it's kind of like this. I mean, he's doing all these geometries by hand, like with compass and rulers, which is very important, like the analog geometries. I was just talking to him about, it's like having all of the gear in order to do the thing. Like, how are we able to interact analog but also have that digital understanding, like spread, to share the messages, create something new? How are the tools creating exactly um how's the message and the medium connected? So like taking these messages and mediums and then overlaying them onto each other to create more, and then
Think it
let the viewer interpret my interpretation. But
I love it. Let me pull up. I'll go through these as well.
yeah. So these are my picture poems, which I've been creating like in stories on my photography page. Um, I've made I've just been working on it, like it was like a night and day, like 10 hours a day, like type of thing, just like making them, creating, writing, and it's kind of this moment of how quickly or not quickly from the sight vision experience into the words to the finished thing to be put out into the world. So it's like, how do I take like this giant experience and bring it to the viewer of the now, to continue to bring us back to the now, and the nowness becomes, or at least I've been utilizing, as building blocks, like the individual paintings overlaid and understanding with the words of the now, and then it's like the photograph of the now, and but then letting the now become more than like the sum of its parts kind of thing. Like there's the moment of this artist, Lewis, opening his hands, and then the feeling and the moment it goes out there into the world, and that speed. And then some of them, like the one I did with Rye, it was then those overlaid into a video, and then it became like another element that like by itself would be by itself, but then it was like that it was made in this way where it wasn't, whereas the music last. And so like, how am I taking it from like, are they the words first, are they the photos first, are they the experience first, what's the first of the now? And so like constantly moving those elements around to find us now in the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they kind of remind me of just like meditations, like little meditations, like with the dishes in the sink. Like, when do we ever just pause, or crumbs on your pants? When do we ever just pause and notice? Like, we're so quick to just move on to the next. So that definitely comes across. And there's some videos here, but I don't know if the sound is working.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure how much more time we have, but
Yeah, I know.
but
I realized it's getting so late as well.
yeah, sometimes Instagram lets me go a little bit over, but I wanted to show like an example of what I've been creating. You can check that more out on my page, Aaron Jack Line Art, where I've been cutting up some of these elements, creating live with musicians, and then the artifact of that creation. So it's,
Beautiful.
I think you said it perfectly, though, of like the meditations. That's really the little momentary noticing, the meditations of understanding, and that that's what it, that's what that and how that's what those picture poems and how they connect to this. It's like noticing those little elements,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully through the visual medium and by having this communication online, exploring and maybe exposing some of that communication, some of that deeper listening, and allowing the viewer or listener, the viewer, the listener, the sensual being who's on the other end, um, being able to notice more
Yeah.
in life.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I want one. I'm watching the video. I want one of those. They're just so fun to watch, and it's cool because you can see them being done, and then you have them to actually like a physical, artifact, as you say, which I love that word to describe it. But
Yeah, it's like right here. It's like the little visions that I see and how it got created, and then you can look back and be like, oh, what was the sound? And so like even just seeing it, seeing it being created, it's like, oh,
yeah,
the sound becomes this. Yeah,
it's now a visual. It's now a visual. It's like transferred over and embodied in a physical form, which is really cool.
yeah, it's not. Yeah, I want to make the distinction, though. It's not the music itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not, like just like we're talking,
Mm-hmm.
my words are not, the end result. Your words are not the end result. Your words are not defining how I interpret the words,
Right.
but it's up to each of us to say, here is, and then how do I interpret?
Yes.
and to better understand that interpretation, and to sometimes at least take once in a while, I'll say, to slow down and study that interpretation inside of ourselves. That's
Yeah, that's really the goal of what you're doing with your work, and I think that's an incredible thing, and it's a really powerful thing as well. Um, so Erin, as we start wrapping up, because I know I didn't even realize the time. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been a 50.
I'm not in a rush. I'm just letting you know.
So, but I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work with us. And, I think my biggest takeaway, as I said, is just how important it is to have these conversations and hold space for these deeper meanings to be uncovered. So, where is the best way for us to, where can we find you and view your work?
It's a good question. So I'm at Aaron Jack Line Art on Instagram. I have a photography page, Aaron Jack and Photography. Soon I'll have a new website at some point, so that will be good then. Um, and that would be wonderful. Just like, let me know that you've watched this, that there's uh out in the world, I guess. Like, DM me, feel free, ask me questions. I just really appreciate you bringing elements out of me and letting me share. I um it's so important, and I just want to encourage you to keep going, and others to ears. And when you can have those ears in front of others and to share others' voices and draw meanings and to let their meanings shine, that's I appreciate you allowing my meaning to shine, and that I appreciate. And thank you all for listening and taking the time to notice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Erin, again. And I will link you when I post this. I'll link your Instagram so everyone can follow you there. But thank you again. This was so fun. And I can't wait to chat with you soon on your platform as well. I'm really looking forward to it. So,
Me too.
and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.